again to another segment of the Grassy Knoll. Pardon me while I adjust the volume here. I never know from one day to another what it's going to be like, and it's peaky today. That should do all right. Okay, again, you will be listening to this series of shows the week of October 8th. And back with us, I have no idea why, because I didn't ask him. It's Andrew Colvin, author of Mothman 2, and you heard him last week, and you're going to hear him again. And Andrew, really, thanks for coming back. It was a pleasant surprise. I mean, I wanted that also, but everybody has, constrictions on their time, and, you don't take it for granted. But thanks for being with us.
Thank you, Viz. I just wanted to say thank you for overall for having me on from the beginning, because it's been, extremely helpful, and especially just in writing the books and things. For people that don't know, Viz, you are one of the stars of the book, the new book, because you're in there quite a bit. We transcribed the interviews in some of the first 10 interviews, and it couldn't have happened. That whole project couldn't have happened without you. So thank you.
You're very welcome, and also I was happy to see you. Kind of build a relationship also with Adam Gorightly, who I think is probably, if not the nicest guy out there, who's doing something. Certainly one of the top three, and that worked out well for you also, did it not?
Yeah. We're going to start trying to write something here at the end of the year.
Excellent.
Together.
Excellent.
Something about Mothman.
All right, good. And by the way, the Vyzygoth's going nuts. I think he likes it when you're on. In fact, I think probably because you talk about, maybe one of his ancestors, right? It could be. Anyway. All right. Where do you want to pick things up, by the way? And also probably in the second hour after we take a break, I'd like to start off by just reading something that a listener/guest came up with after listening to your shows, the ones that played, what would that be, at the end of September into October, I guess, what? 6th or 7th, whatever, that week. It would be last week for people listening now. Anyway, as he was listening, it also, something resonated with him, and he had a couple of connections from another direction with people who were involved in Mothman projects, and I'll surprise you with that at the beginning of the second hour. It won't be too long to read it, but I'd like to do that and see if that pings at all with you, and we'll save that for, as I said, hour 2. So where are we going?
Well, I've got a couple of, errata things from last time. I've got some things that I just missed from last time that are kind of recent, and we've got some recent just things that were happening this week. And I found some notes from the Mothman Festival. I watched the 911 replay that they played on MSNBC and took some interesting notes about that, or at least I think they're interesting.
Did that happen at the anniversary last month? Yeah, on MSNBC, okay.
Yeah, and just a little, at the usual random odds and ends that somebody wrote me and they said, when you go on those little things where you are just sort of riffing on different things, that it triggers in them. I've heard this from lots of people, that it triggers connections in their minds. And they were attributing that whole process kind of to a Garuda process, of if you want to call it that. And I'm sure that this monk in New York, Samudranath, would say that is indeed what it's all about. It's a mental process of discovery that cannot be destroyed in humanity. No matter what the fascists come up with, this process is always going to be there. So it's really a hopeful thing.
All right.
You want me to get started? This
Sure.
is probably going to be a deal where I'm going to just try to get. There's so much stuff, and we're trying to get it all into a small amount of time. And you may end up saying something, and then I'll just move on to a new thing without really responding.
Well, yeah, I know. I've gotten so used to being ignored. It really is okay. I just consider it collateral damage. And
if you make a statement and you don't directly ask a question, I will probably just keep rolling.
That's fair enough.
But one error I made was I got confused on the Barbara Bush thing and Aleister Crowley. It wasn't Barbara Bush. It was her mother who supposedly
begat Barbara, right?
Got pregnant, yeah, by Aleister. So Barbara would be his daughter,
right?
And therefore W would be the grandson, if that were true.
Mm-hmm.
One thing I just forgot to mention was you had mentioned this video of a UFO that's been promulgated recently down in Haiti, actually, is where it was. Is that the one you were referring to? The Haiti video of the UFO?
Yeah, that was one of the two. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Obviously, I tried to do the call block. That didn't work, so I'm sorry for that little irritation. But yeah, that was one of the two that I had seen.
Yeah. Well, we talked about the drone pictures, and I don't know if that's and then there was a drone video too recently across the moon. We had a lunar eclipse recently, and someone filmed a UFO in front of the moon, which was in Kentucky, and was analyzed at Morehead State, which supposedly has a space research center. And I guess this is an undiscovered kind of thing going on in Morehead. And then synchronistically, I was contacted by a gallery, an art gallery that's got some connection to Morehead State. The gallery's in Ashland, and they wanted, we're talking about doing a Mothman show, photography show. And that was all happened like the same day, so that was kind of odd. That I saw the video. I think the event was whenever that was, a month ago, the lunar eclipse. But this Haiti video was also a Microsoft concoction. It also was relating to this Halo 3 video game, just as the drone photos were. And you can't underestimate Microsoft. They're tied in with IBM and the Rockefellers and everything else. And I've worked for a lot of. I don't want to get going on Microsoft, but I've worked for a lot of their people over the years doing remodels and things, and I haven't had good. I haven't gotten a good impression of them and from them in general.
Okay, here's a comment. One of the things that does strike me interesting because how wealthy he is and how that equates to power, and how squeaky clean his image seems to be, and that's Bill Gates. I look at him and I'm like, I don't know, something's going on there. And you can ignore that and go on.
Yeah. Well, yeah. A German friend of mine from Berlin said that, and I think I mentioned this before, that Gates has a photo of one of the Nazi scientists in his office that he reveres, and so on and so forth. But moving along, I was watching Underdog cartoons recently and found that cattle mutilations are in one of the actually not cattle. They don't actually show cattle mutilation, but they show cattle being pulled up into a UFO. And this Underdog ran from 64 to 1970. So it all was definitely, no matter when it happened in the show, it definitely was all before the wave of mutilations hit in the 70s, when people started becoming aware that these black helicopters are flying around. And I think I mentioned in the early 80s it came out that this is a method for testing underground mineral deposits. You have to get a live animal that's just eaten the plants, because the minerals leach up into the plant, and you have to kill the animal right where it's at, and then that's how they map out where the mineral deposits would be. And that was all covered up by the cryptozoologists who attacked the scientist who was a university professor.
All right, I do have a question with regard to this. Do you know whether or not the Bureau of Land Management is involved in that? Can you assume?
Well, I've heard, you always hear about them.
Okay.
Being involved tangentially in some of these high-profile investigations.
And if it happens out west, does it happen necessarily on Bureau of Land Management property, or we would say, government property that's in their care? Does this happen necessarily? Because ranchers have always had a relationship with using, government land for grazing and such.
A lot of them, yeah. People have grazing rights on the government land, yeah. That makes it easier, but not always. Sometimes they're just on private land, too. Moving along. The number 47, I talked about that before. Various synchronicities with it, and then I watched Inland Empire by David Lynch. I've talked about Lynch before, and I'm going to have some of his question and answer things from some of his lectures in the next book. His new movie is about a movie called 47. In other words, Inland Empire is about a movie being made that's called a German movie that's called 47. and there's a mind control reference in the movie, or a theme. A female mind-controlled killer who stabbed someone with a screwdriver.
Ouch.
Screwdriver is the name of a song that we did when I was with the oil guys in Texas. And it was about someone like that. And there was a phrase in the movie that popped up at a crucial time. It was "Do you want to see?" And that's one of my photos in the Mothman 1 book is that phrase. It's a dissolve from a film that I saw at the time that Blue Velvet came out in 1986. The Brazilian film. Just a random shot I took. Just some odd synchronicities like that all through Lynch's stuff. With stuff over the years, I've just found many of these things with his work and stuff that I've done, and I don't know what it means.
All right. What's this gentleman's name?
David Lynch, the filmmaker?
Lynch. Of 47, right?
Yeah. Inland Empire's last film is about a movie called 47.
Okay, well, this is probably useless factoid, and also probably nothing but coincidence, but John Lynch, the defensive back once upon a time for the Buccaneers, who now plays for Denver, this John Lynch wears, guess what number?
Wow.
47.
47, huh? Well, there's another line in the movie, too, where she talks about being from a chemical town where the stuff in the air puts thoughts in people's heads. And this is a line from the Manson Street song that you played on the air a few months ago that I wrote with those guys from Texas.
By the way, refresh your memories. Around what city did you spend most of your time?
Austin?
All right. Maybe in the second hour we can speak to this, because people are starting to write me. And I think they're right. They're going like, what's going on in Austin? How come, like, everything that goes on, I mean, Jones and Tex Mars and Freeman, they're all out of Austin. Anyway, that's later on maybe.
Yeah. Well, another person in that same, the song that I wrote about the chemical town also mentions Roman Polanski. And that same day that I watched Inland Empire, I also rented a random movie off the shelf called The Hallcroft Covenant, because it had Michael Caine in it. I'm like, I like Michael Caine, I'll watch this. Turns out it was made by Frankenheimer, who did The Manchurian Candidate. And the film, The Hallcroft Covenant, is about a Nazi plot after the war to squirrel away all this gold and money to be pulled out later and used to, guess what? Use airplanes to attack buildings. This is actually in the movie.
Oh man, I got to go get that.
Think about the that. Does that mirror reality or what?
All right, now also what's important, and that would be circa what, like 1972?
The movie?
Yes.
The movie's 85.
I was close.
But the funny thing is that Frankenheimer was the last person to eat dinner with Robert Kennedy before he was assassinated, and he had dinner with Polanski and Tate. Tate connects to Manson. They connect to Manson and also connect to the song that I wrote. That mentions the stuff in the air putting thoughts in your heads.
All right.
Just a meaningless synchronicity.
Oh no. No, but yeah, you're being sarcastic on that one. Two things. One, do we know how close in time the dinner between who was it, Polanski and Frankenheimer with Sharon Tate? How soon before her murder?
Well, it was that evening, right before Kennedy went to the hotel.
So I'm guessing if Frankenheimer shows up at your house, you probably might want to tie up loose ends. Yeah, he's an interesting guy too. Also, I don't know if we said this. Did we say this? I don't know if I said this with you or Chris Knowles. And I'm starting to wonder, because of Polanski and what he has been, I'm wondering sometimes if Sharon Tate wasn't a sacrifice.
Well, sure. I mean, yeah. Well, supposedly they had beat up a drug dealer there and connected to Manson, and Manson was, or Watson was issuing the payback for that. Can I move along?
Of course, we might hold it back.
This week we've had a build-up around the Blackwater hearings. Anytime anyone in the Bush administration is on trial or in hearings, you have a slew of terror incidents and scares and shootings, school shootings, and that's just happened. We've been talking about this for months, and here again it's happening again. And I'll come back to those in a second, but because I happen to write these notes in this order, next one came up involving railroad spikes being pulled out of Chicago. Kind of relates to the railroad thing we were talking about last time. One of the fake I don't know if it's a fake thing, but somebody pulled railroad spikes out in Chicago. The same day or the day after, there was a Bush loss on his Patriot Act legislation, which was last week or the week before, when an Oregon judge ruled that parts of the Patriot Act were unconstitutional. And then they had a school shooting a day after that. And where was the school shooting? I think it was in Oregon or California, not too far from there.
What time frame is this? Just recently, right, with the Blackwater hearings?
County.
What's also interesting is Oregon is being identified as one of the 2 or 3 communities. Well, I don't know where it's happening in Oregon, but I think
top off next week.
There you go.
Yeah, for sure. All this stuff is coming together to get everybody's mind off of what is the Bush administration doing in Iraq. And an interesting theory, by the way, really interesting theory about the whole reason we went in. Sure, it's about oil, but it's not what you thought. It's about raising the price of oil to the point where the oil companies can afford to start doing the shale extraction in Canada.
Also want to let you know, too, that not really well reported is the beginning of drilling out in the Gulf. And apparently, I did not feel this, but apparently there was. I don't know what the deal is if it's a cause and effect thing, but they're starting to drill out west of Florida, off the west coast where we are, and also there was an earthquake whose epicenter was somewhere out, obviously in the Gulf, and whose reverberations were felt here in Pasco County. So, I mean, that's another thing that, kind of is going on in plain sight, but it's not really well reported, and we'll see where this really goes. So, anyway.
Yeah, but, kind of getting back to what kind of happened in the last couple of weeks. Mm-hmm. They had the Blackwater shooting on September 17th, the day after the Mothman Festival. Blackwater shooting in Baghdad. Next day, Peruvian meteor makes people sick. Not probably related, of course, but just strange. You often have these weird meteor things happening around other political events, which I've never quite understood. Then the following week, of the 24th through the 29th, it's the UN Climate Change Convention, which is always problematic. It seems to have covered. I mean, I don't know, but why? But they decided in the middle of that convention to announce that the Patriot Act is unconstitutional. So you see how the climate change thing kind of covers up the news about the Patriot Act, which is more important. Clearly, the Patriot Act for us is more important, I think, because the climate change thing is pretty questionable. Scientifically, actually.
Well, the other thing I'm wondering about, too, is if this judge actually broke ranks and did a kneecapping, at least a temporary one, on the Patriot Act. I'm wondering if the little tit for tat was saying, guess what, we're going to bring an exercise to your state. All right?
Yeah, maybe. Who knows? We don't know how that all fleshed out in terms of when they came up with the cities.
First, yeah, right.
But that Patriot Act decision was made based on had to do with these Madrid train bombs, which I think Keel predicted in my interview. He mentioned that might be a site of terrorism, I believe. I know he definitely predicted the one in London. But that was the same day, the 26th, that they started shooting monks in Burma. The Arco regime. The Standard Oil regime in Burma.
And don't be surprised if there's got something to do with the Golden Triangle being resurrected again, and that being a necessary part of the triangle between that also includes India and further Southeast Asia. So there might be something more to that too, with regard to harvesting, shall we say, poppies.
Yeah. On the 27th, the day after that, Chicago railroad spikes are missing. That's the day Bush has his climate change convention. Next day, the 28th, the German chancellor defends the Dalai Lama. I talked about how China is starting to try to legislate the Dalai Lama's reincarnation activities. And that's the same day that they had the school shooting in Oroville, California. So, and then, of course, it flowed into this week. I'll just go ahead and do these now. because this week, the 1st of October, we have the Blackwater hearings. And so leading up to that, we have, guess what, another coal mine incident, 9 dead in Utah. AT&T announces that they're going to censor customers who say things that they don't like. They will, just cancel their accounts. Bush vetoes the child health care bill. The Liberty City 7 trial begins on the 2nd, which is this bogus terror thing where they were going to put bombs in salt shakers. There's a bombing in Mexico. At the same time, they're discussing giving the military $198 billion. A volcano in Yemen explodes. There's 5 Colorado hydroelectric workers are killed. And the next day, there's a bombing of the Polish ambassador in Iraq. Sinkhole in San Diego. Some of these things are always going on, and they just choose to, there's just a lot more tragic stories that seem to come up whenever the Bush administration is on trial for something. Oh, well, this is definitely one. Senate bathrooms are set on fire. Did you hear about that one?
No.
Yeah. So right in the middle of this Blackwater thing, the Senate is being, they weren't anthraxed, thank God, like last time, or when they were discussing whether or not we should go into Iraq. They anthraxed the only 2 guys who had power to shoot down the Patriot Act, or the Homeland. I wrote that down. Where is that? Leahy and where did I write that down? But the 2 guys, Leahy, remember him? Was it Leahy that was anthraxed? No, Daschle. Remember that?
Yeah.
Right after 9/11?
Mm-hmm.
He and another guy were the only 2 guys that could have put the clamps on the Patriot Act. So here, to make sure that the Senate, doesn't go after Blackwater, they set some fires in the bathrooms. The nurses in West Virginia went on strike that same day. And there were 3,000 gold miners trapped in South Africa. And this relates back to something that I mentioned in the Mothman Photographer reality series about how it was reported that a mining company owned by the Bushes, called Baxter, reportedly buried 50,000 miners in one fell swoop. And I forget the year that happened, but it was there's something in mining where there was some loophole where that was the only way that they could get the land away from the miners, because I guess there were small claims that had been already officially lodged by all these different people, small operators. And in order for Baxter to take it all over, they just buried the guys in, and that was how they solved the problem. And that's kind of, I've never really heard much about that in the media. I forget the source for it too, but you wonder about these miners being trapped this week, just how that happened.
Mm-hmm.
Moving along to my random list of things. The did I ever mention, did the BBC footage thing, was that since you and I stopped talking at the end of last year? The footage came out showing the BBC reporter standing in her office or in some studio with a window showing Building 7 behind her standing, and she's reporting that it has fallen?
Yeah.
Do you remember that?
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Was this year, right?
Yes, it was.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, that whole thing got covered up. They pulled the footage off of YouTube and everywhere else. But we should not forget that happened. Somehow the BBC knew in advance that the building was coming down. And maybe this is a good time to get into those 911 notes I made.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'll come back to these random things. So I watched the replay of the 911 footage that they showed the whole thing over again in real time on this last anniversary. So at 10 o'clock in the morning, I'm watching it, and they're playing stuff that happened at 10 o'clock, that day in 2001. And it's MSNBC, which is Katie Couric, Tom Brokaw, and Matt Lauer. Lauer has a tangential connection to this because he went to Marshall University, which is near Point Pleasant. Or actually, he worked at the news station there.
Yeah, he went to Ohio U, bro.
Yeah, he worked at the Huntington News Station.
Yeah.
And when I was studying journalism with Ralph Turner at Marshall, who was the original reporter for Mothman, and Lauer was helping do little workshops with students, teaching them how to use the equipment and stuff. So he was the only guy who seemed to have any emotion about what was happening. I don't know. Did you watch this stuff at all? Did you see this program I'm talking about, this replay?
No.
Kirk and Brokaw were emotionless, strangely emotionless. I mean, it's like, maybe it was a good thing at the time you're sitting there because I remember when it was happening how nervous I was, and maybe it was comforting in a way that they were staying so calm. But in retrospect, you're like, why aren't these people upset? They're comatose.
Well, and Brokaw knows the handshake. Okay, I mean. Well,
yeah. This is you'll see this when I get to what he said in a minute.
Sure.
But I'll just go in order. I started watching it well, I don't remember exactly when I started watching it, but the Pentagon was hit at 9:37, and they mention a big white plane being seen over the White House as they're talking about the Pentagon. And no one knows if this is the big white plane that was owned by Murdoch. Was it Murdoch? Is he the one that met Bush at Air Force Base? No, Buffett,
yeah.
Buffett owned this white plane that was seen all over the place that day, some kind of surveillance plane. Or it could have been the white Navy surveillance planes that you see here in Seattle parked at Boeing Field.
Are you talking about AWACS, or are you talking about C-130s?
Yeah.
Or okay.
Yeah, they have different ones, but they're pretty ominous looking. But this plane was seen over Shanksville, too. It was flying all over. It's basically coordinating everything, one would think. Well, they mentioned an interesting thing, that the FBI wasn't around that day. They keep mentioning that the counterterrorism teams for the FBI were in Monterey at a secret military exercise, and that they were in disarray because they were over there in Monterey. So they couldn't be counted on to do anything. Well, it's interesting that, less than a year later, Monterey comes out that the DC sniper was at Monterey. And he shot a counterterrorism expert who was critical of the Bush administration, Linda Franklin. So there's a little thing there. Interesting that why were they talking about the FBI? Why were they giving them cover, so strongly? Another thing I noticed was that the first building fell, and no one mentioned it for like 5 minutes. They had footage all running of this event, right, of real time. You see the building fall, and no one says anything for 5 minutes, which is a long time on TV. Finally, Matt Lauer says, "Well, I think that wasn't just a piece of the tower. I think the whole tower came down." Then there's a car bomb at 10:24 that Katie Couric mentions outside the State Department, and these car bombs have been reported more recently. More and more is coming out about all these car bombs that went off that day. She keeps mentioning that it's a 727 that hit the towers, or a 737. And that, of course, is the kind of engine that they actually found there. They didn't find a 757 engine anywhere. So that's a little oddity. How did Katie know that it was a 720, what it really was? Well, but the most interesting thing for me was that at 10:28, as the second tower comes down, 2 seconds before it starts falling, they say, "A warning has gone out at the Pentagon to take cover." And this didn't fit in at all to the coverage because, like I say, it was very comatose and very dry and emotionless. And then suddenly they say this with some emotion: "Take cover at the Pentagon." And then 2 seconds later, literally, the building starts falling. And as it's falling, Brokaw says, "This is a declaration of war on the terrorists."
Yeah.
And then about like a minute or two later, he says the reverse. He goes, and this is a declaration of war on us from the terrorists. So he lays. How does he know? You know, they had up until that point, they didn't have any idea if it was even terrorism. You know, that these planes had. I mean, I guess by the time the second plane hit, you figured it was, but.
Well, you can go back
like
also.
Immediately, as soon as it's falling, he makes sure to say that, so that it's programmed into people as it's falling, as they're seeing it happen. This is how you're going to understand it and think about it for the rest of your life, or as long as we can make you think about it that way, you know.
And real quick, let me just point out something also, that Rather had, when he was watching this take place, had said that it looked like a controlled demolition.
Yeah.
And of course, Rather got shipped out. Brokaw probably has, like Walter Cronkite, the most credibility of anyone, and this guy is dangerous, no doubt about it, so that you're saying that he's the first one to come out with this. Obviously, he was chosen for that.
Yeah. I mean, it seems that way. Sure. And here's another thing, is that they had Pat Dawson, their reporter, stationed 10 blocks away, all during this thing, before the towers fell, and so on and so forth. Well, interestingly, after the towers fell, guess where the smoke stopped? Right about 100 feet behind Pat Dawson. How did they know that 10 blocks away was the exact location that you needed to be to avoid, you know, serious smoke and asbestos?
Well, I tell you what, too, there could be a little coincidence involved in that. I mean, they could see which way the wind was blowing and say, all right, here's where we're going to set up because you'll be out of harm's way. Maybe. You know, on that one,
well,
you never do know.
He was there the whole time.
Well, what I think is interesting is that he was one of the first reporters to talk about bombs in the building.
Sure, yeah.
And he paraphrased his conversation with a member of the New York Fire Department, talking about how they think there were bombs in the planes and they think there were secondary devices in the building.
Well, another thing I noticed is that I think the reason that they started the demo at the top is because it created this mushroom umbrella of debris that covered up the charges,
right,
so that you couldn't see the charges going off.
Right. Yep. I mean, since that time, as you well know, it's been frozen. But as to the naked eye at that time in all replays, if you're just watching what they're allowing you to see now, of course you're right, it did cloak it.
And so within a few minutes after it fell, they're saying that the NSA and CIA are shut down. At 10:54, which is an hour, less than a half an hour later, they're saying we have to look at Bin Laden. And this came from the BBC, from Reuters. Reuters was the first to say that 3 weeks ago, Bin Laden predicted a major attack on the United States. And they referenced a London reporter who had, quote, access to Bin Laden. So within a half an hour, you have the British stepping in to do that. And
that's why we love them.
Yeah, and you were mentioning earlier about the British involvement in John Wilkes Booth and in our little pre-warm-up.
And the Knights of the Golden Circle.
Talk about that at all? The John Wilkes Booth connection to Jesse James and the Knights of the Golden Circle, which are out of Cincinnati, by the way.
Yeah, I mean, if you're asking me, I mean, what we were talking about brief, and as the Knights of the Golden Circle were approached, apparently by, I don't know how many went to England, but certainly certain British military instructors were dealing with prominent figures in the Knights of the Golden Circle to get themselves into a situation to raise up militias. This is like goes back to the 40s and 50s in preparation for the Civil War. So here again, the Knights of the Golden Circle out of Great Britain, and also once again Great Britain playing both sides of the Mason-Dixon line for obvious reasons. So.
Well, and I want to mention Nicholas Hager, Hagger. He's written a couple of books, The Syndicate, The Secret History of the West, and a couple of others about, he really talks a lot about the intricacies of this Masonic conspiracy to start the Civil War. And you were saying that Wilkes Booth knew about the oil boom coming and bought some land in Pennsylvania, and then he moved to Harper's Ferry, which is where he was at when John Brown was hung. Booth was there as a military intelligence guy, he took part in putting down the uprising.
Yeah, now let me ask you real quick. Do you remember a suburb of Harper's Ferry that starts with an R? If you can't, because there's a particular place, it's on the Heights in Harper's Ferry where Booth had a farm that where his estranged wife was living. And
Ramon?
Huh?
Looking at a map here, see something called Ramon?
No, that wouldn't be it. In fact, I might be wrong about the R, but I do know a former coworker of mine at St. Leo had lived in Harper's Ferry for some time as a commuter into D.C., worked at Catholic University, and knew it. He knew the place as it was when he was there. But the thing is, I know that everybody thought Booth was dead, so he can kind of hide and not worry about it too much, that anybody be looking for him. But apparently he spent a couple of months at that farm. The other thing is Booth was anything but penniless, and yes, had bought land in northwest Pennsylvania in anticipation of an oil boom. And let's face it, Rockefeller was ready to go right around or just before the Civil War. So this is imminent, and Booth knew about it. If you want to look into this further, I would say Dark Union is the book you want to check out. That speaks to this at some length, and those two authors just wrote this a couple of years ago. And so I think they were involved with the University of Indiana. And Indiana is the state in which John Wilkes, an English immigrant, moved to, and Booth knew him, and he took his identity. And with that identity of an English immigrant, went to San Francisco, got a passport as a British citizen that got him out of the United States and eventually to Ceylon and then a jump over to India. So very interesting stuff. I know Epperson says he came back and James killed him because he was mouthing off. I don't know. So anyway, and also that means you got two people that were supposed to be dead. Supposedly dead Jesse James was supposed to have killed a supposedly dead John Wilkes Booth. That's a lot to
Well, there's definitely a connection between them, and they both have West Virginia connection.
There you go.
James lived in West Virginia, and my cousin actually lived in the house that he lived in for a long time. She owned it. She sold it, but there were connections to the Ford family of the automobile family with Jesse James. There's a movie out now with Brad Pitt playing Jesse James, and I have some tangential connection to Pitt and to Jesse James through my cousin. But those guys were involved in that secret society out of Cincinnati, connected to these, elite industrialists who come up time and time again. Like United Fruit was basically owned out of Cincinnati, and they're connected to the Rockefellers in various ways.
Hey, real quick, if you know this, I just want to ask you while it's in the forefront of my mind. It would seem to me that Cincinnati was almost more pro-South. Than Kentucky and certainly West Virginia. Yeah,
and it's a big German place too. Basically a German town. So it is. It's an interesting microcosm of where the food scam of America has originated. You could really say the fast food chains, Kroger, Procter and Gamble,
and what's the
huge corporations.
And what's the nickname of Cincinnati?
I don't know.
The Queen City.
Ah, the Queen City. Interesting. That Turner's from there.
I mean, why the Queen? Oh, you got it. You got to love it. And we have some listeners in Cincinnati who are going to be pounding the table when they hear this. They'll like that.
Did I finish up with my
9/11 screed?
9/11 screed. I think I did. Some more random things then. We'll move on here.
All right, let me just throw this before you go, okay? A Florida connection. Obviously, it's funny that where would George be hiding out during 9/11 than in his brother's state? And on the Friday before 9/11, there was an executive order put through in the state to activate the National Guard. A second one was implemented just minutes after the towers were struck. It was the first place where executive orders were implemented before even New York did it, before Pennsylvania did it, and before the district did it. Well, whether it can or not, I don't know. But New York City, certainly, and Shanksville, Pennsylvania, both those states were slower than Florida to enact executive orders to activate the National Guard. That probably was a hurricane coming. Right. Sorry, go ahead.
Well, Ohio, one more thing about Ohio, I was finding out that Battelle has a data mining system, computer system that they've developed called Total something. It sounds like, like one of these Dick Cheney things to,
Total information awareness, yes.
Yeah, to backdoor any database without being noticed. But the connection, the thing that got me thinking about Battelle was that my sister did a thesis in the late 1990s, her nursing thesis about, she anonymously polled all these nurses and found that the pharmaceuticals were destroying healthcare in various ways and degrading healthcare in the hospitals. And her thesis has basically been disappeared from the system. She wrote the thesis through a university in Louisville, and it was stored on a database called OCLC, OCL, Online Computer Library, in Dublin, Ohio, which is where Battelle has one of their major offices.
Also understand something too, Andrew, whether you know this or not, but OCLC did start in Ohio. Interestingly, Harry, my former partner, was up there working for another company, which was a defense contractor that went up there. Now, what happens is OCLC has turned into a huge database for all libraries, originally being the Ohio blah, blah, blah. Well, the acronym still stays the same. They've changed the name.
Oh.
But what began in Dublin has become the 700-pound gorilla when it comes to databases for libraries, especially academic.
One thing I found out recently was that the Chief Cornstalk area in near Point Pleasant was called Moortown, which gets back to this whole idea that the Moors were living in West Virginia, not the Indians.
Are you talking about Sarah Jane like Moore?
Well, no, it's spelled differently, Mohrtowin. Okay. But I think a lot of times they change spellings and things to confuse the issue. Like, for instance, with the Garuda. They spell it with Garuda here in the West, but actually it's Guruda in other places, certain other places, like maybe, I don't know exactly where, but that was the older name for it, the older Western name for it, I guess. And that more directly defines what it could be, because like I was saying last time, it is believed that gurus can manifest, change shape, and project out Garuda, visualizations that other people can see. And that's why they were called Garudas, with the Guruda. And that's kind of obscured now simply by this changing the spelling a little bit.
Let me ask you also real quick. Somebody wanted to get in contact with you, and I think I did that, because you had mentioned, back in the old days, about a particular tree. Was it in the town of Newmarket? Does that ring a bell at all?
That sounds like the Dover Demon standing by a tree.
All I know is that this gentleman, because he had just moved to the area and contemporaneously also heard that show, wanted to know if you knew anything further about that. And I just know, there's a lot of new markets around too, but I believe it was a new market in West Virginia that you were addressing about a particular tree. So I didn't know if you recalled having any exchange with that person, but, just talking about, towns out there and such, I just,
I didn't. But it reminds me of this other little name thing, which is, I talked about Loki, the Thor, the nemesis of Thor, right, hiding in a tree for eons and then coming out, being similar to my sighting of something coming out of a tree. The spirit inside of a Garuda knife or Chris knife in Southeast Asia is called a Lok, L-O-K. Very similar spelling or name there for the same kind of thing. So you can almost see that gurus or masters could store energy in trees, and that it has a certain name, and that relates to the Garuda knives, because these channelers are able to read the knives or speak to the knives, make the knives move even with their minds. and that has the same name as a spirit trapped inside of a tree from the Norse myths, from Thor.
My grandparents were Norwegian immigrants, regaled me with those stories. I'll tell you what, those Vikings had some really nasty fairy tales.
Yeah.
This is not something you tell a kid before he goes to bed. And then the troll ate the... No, never mind.
A few more things from this week that I forgot to mention, just crazy things that they're heaping on us to make us forget about Blackwater in Iraq. There was a law firm rampage yesterday in Alexandria, Louisiana. People were killed. There was a death of a woman in Phoenix Airport in custody for no reason. There was a girl who dropped a pie in a school, had her arm broken by the guards.
There you go.
School guards, and then didn't they taser the guy who was filming it too? Anyway, this reminded me of the whole pie thing and the Mothman thing, because I'm always joking about this local list, a Mothman list, trading baking recipes, and there's this one woman who's really anti-Andy Colvin, who's always, trying to make me look bad and things, and one time she accidentally sent me an email, she had my address, showing that she disseminates recipes for Southern Progress Publishing out of Texas, which is the same company from which emanated the change to JFK's motorcade route. Back in 63, it was a Southern Progress lady who made the decision to send him through Dealey Plaza. And then since then, this lady, back to the Mothman here, recently, now is saying that she's friends with Daryl Sims, who's this UFO researcher who's sort of inserted himself into the Mothman story now. But he's openly saying that he's a CIA guy, or that he used to work for the CIA. And there's a whole bunch of people out there that think that's just great. When they hear that somebody used to work for the CIA, somehow it gives them credibility. I think that's sort of the CIA's new tack, is that, there is a law against, if you are a government agent, not telling people that you are. And I don't know if they've changed that law or not, but it used to be that you could ask someone, well, are you a government agent or not? And if they lie to you, then anything they do after that, can be thrown out of court. So their new tack is to say openly that they are, and therefore, they can do a better job of whatever it is they're going to do, infiltrate or...
Well, let me just say also that Alex Jones, Mr. Fearmongerer himself, and his toadies, if they really do exist, the Watson brothers from England, who somehow know more about what's going on here than any of us do, just ran a story that an ex-CIA guy said there's only 12 Al-Qaeda left.
Right.
Yeah, that's probably what, grumpy, dopey, sleepy. Anyway, I'm an ex-CIA guy, therefore, how do you know? You don't know. Okay, whatever.
Well, it's true that there aren't very many Al-Qaeda, real Al-Qaeda,
Well, there never were. Yeah, I know. Right.
They changed the definition of Al-Qaeda now, so, as they do everything.
Well, the best story is about that French, and we're not to confuse this with Romeo Dallaire from Canada. He's a French-Canadian. This guy was a French officer in the UN forces who said Al-Qaeda was the name we had for a database called, what was it called? What was it called? The something or other, I forget now, I'm sorry. But anyway, the thing is, the guy got, drummed out, and of course, sent out to sit in an ash pile with a hairsuit on. So, Al-Qaeda was a goof right from the very beginning. It referred to a computer system.
Yeah. Other things recently, they had the Tacoma pumpkin bomb scare yesterday.
That sounds interesting.
A pork commissioner candidate called the FBI and said some stuff about a nuclear bomb, and they come out, and it's a bizarre story, like, what is going on here? And they come out and they find that he's got a pumpkin. The story itself doesn't make any sense.
It doesn't, I know.
Did you hear that story? I was like, got jobs, but then when the time comes to have the military crackdown or whatever, since we're so spread out militarily, they'll have to deputize somebody to crack down on everyone, and the best people to do that would be people from Mexico or whatever who are used to that kind of thing anyway, to get in, hop in the black vans and drive around terrorizing everyone. It's.
Oh, listen, by the way, we had a little glitch. We had a dropout. That's why I was going to tell you to hold up, because if it went any longer, I was going to stop the programming. But we're okay. We're back again. Understand something, too, and this shows you how it's different physically or in physics from the Canadian border and the Mexican border. A couple that retired in your state and lived right on the other side of the Canadian border, I don't know if you know this story, wanted to build a wall to keep their dog inside the property because if it ran across the road, it was in Canada. And then they knew that when you cross over to try to get the dog, you trip electric eyes. Okay?
Right.
All right, and then everybody comes out in the world, right? So they also get busted now for building the wall because you might be hiding terrorists. But here's the point. They've got electric eyes on the border where we have no problems, and they can't figure out, 2,000 miles to the south, how in the world do we keep these Mexicans out? You know what I mean? And then the other day I heard Skeletor Chertoff talking glowingly about how they built 130 miles this year of fencing, and if we get enough appropriations, we can probably do another 70. And I'm like, what a crap. They got electric eyes where nobody has any problems, and they're putting up fences, 3 sections a day. Oh, God. Do people ever ask questions,
Well, down there in Texas, they also had, probably you saw this on Jones' site, another school guard pushing the camera into the face of a reporter. And the school guard, he looked Hispanic or something. He looked like he was half Hispanic, half Asian or something. But he had fatigues. It's like, what are school guards doing wearing fatigues? Moving on.
Mm-hmm.
There's another guy doing a Mothman special. You have all these big channels doing Mothman specials where they talk about, nothing. They talk about a scary thing that flew around, and they don't get into any of this. They're just ever since, it all kind of. It's weird. The more the Garuda story comes out, the more the more the opposite you get. The more film teams want to come in and do these mainstream things that say absolutely nothing, but fill people's minds with, the wrong ideas about Mothman, or just the most simplistic. So this latest one is being filmed by an American university professor for the Biography Channel, and I won't get into American University too much, except to say that it is definitely a CIA school, and it seems like that's the kind of tenor you have to most of these crews. There's some,
Are we talking about the one in D.C.?
Yeah.
American International?
I found it interesting that American University would be sending somebody to do a special about a supernatural creature. We have the IHOP connection, just a little random string about IHOP. It came out recently that the Muhammad Atta is still alive and and his address is an IHOP. He's on one of his buddies, one of his Al-Qaeda buddies, has a business down there in Tampa Venice, and I forget the name. Hopsticker was talking about this and how that business, Otto was on the list of directors before 9/11, and he's still on the list of directors, and his address is an IHOP, International House of Pancakes, and that happens to be the same place where a Republican congressperson took a bribe in mid-July of this year. I don't remember the name of the particular congressman, but that story came out. He took the bribe in an IHOP bathroom.
What is it with bathrooms,
I had it.
And Republicans.
Yeah. Well, I got hepatitis in an IHOP here in Seattle. The only time I ever got that in my life was eating at an IHOP.
Did you go into the bathroom there?
Well, obviously the cook did, and didn't wash their hands. That's basically how you get it.
God.
And then this activist singer that was killed here in Seattle years ago, Mia Zapata, who was from Ohio, from Antioch there. She was murdered, but she was abducted next to an IHOP. Moving along, we've got the bee thing here. Someone posted yesterday that they were driving through Ravenswood, West Virginia, which is near Point Pleasant, and they found a large bee on the road. It looked like a bee. It was like some mutated animal. They don't know what it was. They can't identify it. It was as big as a groundhog, a large groundhog, but it looked like a bee. It had yellow stripes and wings.
And wings?
And they're wondering, what is it? And it just made me think of this thing I have in my office. I have a Native American print, how they do these stylized prints of things. They have Garuda, and they have thunderbirds. You'll see thunderbirds and things. I have some of those too, but I have this one of a bee. Actually it's a moth. This is actually, I guess, gets a little more into the Mothman. It's a moth, and it's entitled Moth, and it's by Willie Wasdorf. I can't remember what tribe he's in, but if you turn it upside down and you look at it, it looks just like an heyoka in the Native American tradition of the Southwest, because it has, the heyokas used to wear these cone head caps that have stripes on them, yellow stripes, so they look like a bee. And the heyokas, of course, are the people that are known to have seen the Thunderbird, too.
We are to understand that these stripes were horizontal, right?
Yes.
Okay.
And they're actually they would have whole suits of stripes. So here you have the heyoka not only seeing a Thunderbird, but also dressing like a bee, which is kind of weird. So the heyokas are making the connection between the two. And in this particular one, it looks like an heyoka that is flying toward you with arms outstretched and wings. And a female one, too, by the way.
How do you tell that?
I don't know. It just, you have to see it.
Yeah.
I'll put it on my site. I'll put it on the discussion group so people can see it. By the way, I posted your 911 with blood all over it, that ad, the liquor ad.
Oh, yeah. Right, Maker's brand or something like that? Yeah.
Well, I forget that.
Yeah, it was Maker's whatever, scotch or something like that, and that is their, obviously, signature thing, over-pouring wax, red wax down the bottles, and of course, what Andy's referring to is that they had an ad about New York, and this was pre-9/11, where they had, the towers and stuff over-poured with this red wax, but of course, obviously, after 9/11, you look at it as blood symbolism. I do believe that's a coincidence, but that's really strange. The one I don't think is a coincidence is that Italian refrigerator made by GE with the New York model. You remember that?
Yeah.
And that's a different story.
I put that in the book.
Okay.
Are we coming up on 1 hour?
Yeah, you want to take a break? We'll be back in 5 minutes. Let me tighten up this particular recording. I'll get back with you in 5 minutes. Would that be all right?
Okay.
All right, let's do it. See you in a little bit.
Bye.